war with Russia is not a good idea for the United States. Say that out loud sometime. It's not an extreme position. Most Americans would agree with you. But you will immediately be denounced as a tool of Putin. What is this? It's name calling as a means of social control. The people in charge have decided their primary job is to decide who you should hate. In an environment like this, everything feels like propaganda, and that's because much of it is. On Thursday, we told you that Russian forces had bombed a nuclear reactor in Ukraine. That seemed to be true. President Zelensky of Ukraine had said it repeatedly, but it was not true. No reactors were hit. An unnamed Ukrainian official claimed that radiation levels in the area had risen. That turned out to be untrue as well. In the words of Mark Nelson, who's a nuclear energy analyst, quote, "I'm afraid to say this looks like a coordinated effort to induce panic." Of course. It was what we call disinformation, and it was designed to get you to support a war against Russia.
Okay, so it is important during a war when stuff is developing very fast and it's difficult to immediately have clarification to care about whether what you are reporting is true or not. Now, some of the misinformation he's identifying, I literally never even saw. Maybe he uses different news sources than me, but we should always clarify what is true as we get new information. He then makes a massive jump to, once again, this is about demonizing Russia. Tucker Carlson, of course, spent the months leading up to this invasion pre-apologizing for it, trying to get his audience to wonder why it is that if there were to be a war, that would be a bad thing. Or if there was a war, why they would side with Ukraine over Russia. He many times said, I side with Russia in that. The invasion happened. He pauses very briefly to take a look around the country and see that people are horrified at what they're seeing. They do not support the invasion. They don't like the targeting of civilians. He paused for a minute and now he's right back to, nope. Anytime they talk about any of the terrible stuff that's happening right now, you should not pay attention to that. You should not trust that. Not out of a normal cynicism towards the exploitation of dramatic events. No, because if you acknowledge anything that's happening, that's them getting you ready for war with Russia. Well, I can only speak for myself. I have no interest whatsoever in any war with Russia, in any war with anyone ever. But I do think that we need to know what's happening. I have a dedication to the truth, particularly in incredibly high stakes events like the ongoing invasion. So, David, I'm curious what you think about this. Tucker is in this very weird position when it comes to this war, and it's been fascinating to watch him attempt to figure out what his line is supposed to be.
Well, I harken back to my years covering the Pentagon, both at Fox News 20-some years ago and also at NBC News. And when you're covering a battlefield, there's always a lot of misinformation. And it's very difficult to pin down the details about until the smoke clears. However, it's very different to say, okay, we can't figure out the exact details of this particular battle, this particular fight, and we don't understand the larger picture here. And the larger picture is perfectly clear. Russia invaded a sovereign nation. Russia is the one that is leading us to a possible conflict with the United States. It's not the United States that's leading us to a conflict with Russia. Russia is the bad actor here in invading a sovereign country and wanting to take over Ukraine. That's clear. And so for Tucker Carlson to conflate the two and say, oh, well, because we got some of the details wrong about this particular fight, therefore we can't trust. No, you can trust that the bad actor here is Russia, period.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that Ukraine will never do anything wrong. It certainly doesn't mean that the US will never do anything wrong. If and when they continue to do so, we will be there to criticize them, to hold them to account. But it is fairly clear who is the aggressor in this case, and he just hates that. He hates the fact that it is made marginally more difficult for him to convince his audience that Vladimir Putin should be their best friend or whatever. Sorry, buddy. I didn't ask him to invade. And by the way, there are a lot of things about the American response already that we can criticize, including the massive amount of money that we're gonna spend, not in terms of like helping them directly, but just bulking up needlessly our own military budget. But that said, Biden has not sent troops in. He has not attacked Russia. It is not impossible to conceive that some politician might have done that if that was their goal. But so far, he has been very restrained in terms of trying to stop any sort of conflict with Russia. So for Tucker Carlson to come to the conclusion that all of this is about building up to a massive war, well, it's not only insane and demands evidence, but it is thus far 100% evidence free. That's not gonna slow him down at all, but we should take note of it at least.
Yeah, it's also insulting. And look, I get there is an intellectual argument. I disagree. There's an intellectual argument that some folks on the right might make about how provocative NATO is, and maybe the United States should be doing less with NATO, or Donald Trump wanted to perhaps get the United States out of NATO. And there are people on the right who support that. But now is not the time for that conversation. Right now, we're facing a nuclear-armed superpower which has invaded a sovereign country which is trying to fight back. This isn't about NATO. This isn't about the positioning of the United States vis-a-vis Russia in terms of geopolitics. This is about, well, what is it that the United States should be doing to help people who simply yearn to be free to live in their own sovereign country? And I agree. I think the Biden administration has been exceptionally restrained and made it very clear US forces are not going to be engaged with Russian forces, period. Yeah. That could make it more difficult for the Ukrainians, but I get the sense that it's going to be like, when Russia rolled into Czechoslovakia or Hungary. There are a lot of Americans who hated that, but it was US policy to let it happen. And that may be what happens here with Ukraine. But for Tucker Carlson to say, oh no, we're now itching for war with Russia is patently absurd.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.